He stood on the edge of the rooftop, 20 stories above the city, wind screaming past his ears, and below him the lights of the empire he built looked like tiny stars scattered on the ground. 15 years ago, he had nothing. Not $1. Not one friend who believed in him. Tonight, he was worth $2.3 billion. And yet his hands were shaking harder than they ever had when he was poor. Because 30 minutes ago, walking through the marble lobby of his own company, he looked into the eyes of a woman refilling coffee cups for his executives, and his whole body went cold. It was her, the waitress, the one who saved his life 15 years ago in a diner that no longer exists. The one whose face he had tried for 15 years to forget. And she was standing right there, wearing a uniform, working for him, and she had no idea who he was. Before we go back and see how all of this happened, if this story is already pulling you in, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and share this with someone who loves a good redemption story. Now let's go back to where it all began. 15 years earlier, in a small town where the winters were long and the paychecks were shorter, there lived a young man named Nathaniel Hale. Nathaniel was 26 years old, and he had exactly $41 to his name. He worked at a hardware store lifting bags of concrete for 9 hours a day, and every night he came home to a tiny apartment with a mattress on the floor and a window that didn't close all the way. He wasn't lazy. He wasn't foolish. He simply hadn't caught a single break in his entire life. His father died when he was 12. His mother worked 2 jobs until her body gave out. And Nathaniel grew up believing that some people were just born to struggle, and he was one of them. He was engaged to a woman named Rachel. Rachel was beautiful, sharp-tongued, and ambitious in a way that scared him sometimes. She wore second-hand dresses to nice restaurants and pretended they were new. She talked about the mansion she would own someday the way other people talked about breathing, like it was simply necessary for her to exist. Nathaniel loved her, or at least he loved the idea that someone as beautiful as Rachel had chosen someone as ordinary as him. He didn't yet understand that some people don't love you. They just love what you might become. One evening, Nathaniel took every dollar he had saved for 6 months, $112, and he took Rachel to the nicest restaurant in town to propose. Not propose marriage, they were already engaged, but propose a plan. He had an idea for a small logistics company, a way to help local shops deliver goods faster and cheaper. He believed in it with his whole chest. He spread out his notebook full of numbers and diagrams across the white tablecloth, and he asked Rachel to believe in him too. Rachel looked at the notebook. She looked at his second-hand suit jacket. She looked at the small ring on her finger, the one he had saved 8 months to afford. And then she laughed. Not a cruel laugh, not at first. A tired laugh. The kind of laugh a person gives when they've finally admitted something to themselves. She told him she couldn't do it anymore. She told him she couldn't spend her whole life waiting for a future that might never come. She told him that some men were built for greatness, and some men were built to lift concrete bags for the rest of their lives. And she was sorry, but she believed he was the second kind. She took off the ring, placed it gently on his folded notebook, and walked out of the restaurant without looking back. Nathaniel sat there in silence for a long time. The waiters avoided his table. Other customers pretended not to stare. He felt something break inside his chest, something that would take years to fully understand. He paid the bill with money meant for his rent, and he walked out into the night with absolutely nothing left. Not a fiancé, not a plan, not even the $41 he started the week with. He walked for hours, not caring where his feet took him, until he found himself standing on a bridge overlooking the river that cut through town. The water was black and moving fast, and for the first time in his life, Nathaniel Hale thought about how easy it would be to simply stop existing. Not because he was weak, because he was so tired of trying and failing and trying and failing that his mind had convinced him that trying itself was the problem. He gripped the railing. His knuckles turned white, and that is when a voice cut through the darkness behind him. "Sir, are you okay?" He turned, startled, and saw a young woman standing a few feet away, holding 2 paper bags of leftover food from the diner where she clearly worked. She was still wearing her apron, stained from a long shift, her hair falling out of its ponytail, exhaustion written across her face. But her eyes, when they met his, held something he hadn't felt directed at him in a very long time. Concern. Real, simple, human concern from a total stranger. Her name was Grace. She was 24 years old, working double shifts at a diner to support her younger brother after their parents passed, and she had absolutely no reason to stop on that bridge that night. But something about the way Nathaniel stood, the stillness in his shoulders, the way he wasn't just looking at the water, but into it, made her stomach turn cold with fear. She didn't call the police. She didn't run. She simply walked closer, slowly, the way you'd approach a frightened animal, and she started talking. She told him about her terrible day at the diner. She told him about a customer who complained his coffee was too hot, and then complained it was too cold 2 minutes later. She told him, without asking him a single question about why he was standing on that bridge, that whatever was wrong tonight, it would still be wrong tomorrow morning, but at least tomorrow morning the sun would be up, and things always feel a little more survivable in daylight. She kept talking for almost 20 minutes. She never once mentioned what she suspected. She never once made him feel exposed or pitted. She simply existed beside him, warm and steady, until his grip on the railing loosened, until his breathing slowed, until the darkest version of that night quietly passed him by. Before she left, she handed him one of the paper bags of food. Inside was a warm sandwich and a slice of pie, food meant for her and her brother's dinner. She told him to eat something, to go home, to get some rest. And then she said something that Nathaniel would carry with him for the next 15 years. She said, "You look like someone the world isn't done with yet." Then she turned and walked away into the night, and Nathaniel never even asked her name. He went home that night, and he didn't sleep. He sat at his small kitchen table with a notebook Rachel had rejected, and he read through his plans again and again. Something about the stranger's words lit a small, stubborn fire in his chest. The world isn't done with you yet. He decided, right then, at 3 a.m, that he would prove it true. The next 15 years were not a fairy tale. They were brutal. Nathaniel took his logistics idea and pitched it to 17 different investors. 16 of them said no. It's her. Older, yes. 15 years older. Lines around her eyes that weren't there before. Hair pulled back in a neat bun instead of falling loose from exhaustion. But it is unmistakably her. The same eyes that once looked at a stranger on a bridge with more compassion than most people show their own family. The same voice, only steadier now, more tired in a different way, the tiredness of someone who has been quietly surviving for a very long time. Her name tag reads Grace. Nathaniel Hale, the man who negotiated billion-dollar mergers without blinking. The man whose face never gave away a single emotion during the most hostile business meetings of his career, feels his entire chest cave in with the force of 15 years catching up to him all at once. He doesn't say anything. He can't. He simply stares, and Grace, mistaking his silence for anger about the spilled coffee, quickly apologizes again and hurries away with her cart, disappearing down the hallway toward the executive break room, completely unaware that she just walked past the single most important person in her past without recognizing him at all. Because to Grace, this was just an ordinary Tuesday. She didn't remember a stranger on a bridge 15 years ago the way he remembered her. She had stopped that night out of instinct, said what needed to be said, and moved on with her own impossibly hard life, never imagining that moment would mean anything to anyone but her own conscience. She had her own storm to survive back then, and in the years since, an entirely different set of storms. Nathaniel stands frozen in the lobby for almost a full minute before his assistant, a sharp young woman named Priya, gently touches his arm and reminds him the board is waiting. He nods, forces his legs to move, and walks into the meeting room like a man sleepwalking through his own life. For the rest of that day, Nathaniel cannot focus. In the middle of a presentation about supply chain restructuring, his mind keeps drifting back to the lobby, to her face, to the impossible coincidence of finding her here, inside his own company, after 15 years of searching and failing to find her anywhere else. He calls Priya into his office and asks, as casually as he can manage, about the catering staff. Priya explains that the coffee service is run through a third-party vendor contracted by the building, not directly employed by Hale Logistics. The woman's full name, according to the vendor list, is Grace Whitfield. Grace Whitfield. He says the name quietly to himself after Priya leaves, and something in his chest aches with a strange, complicated relief. Finally, after 15 years, a name to go with the face he never forgot. That night, Nathaniel does something he rarely allows himself to do. He goes home to his enormous, mostly empty penthouse, pours a glass of scotch he doesn't drink, and simply sits by the window overlooking the city, remembering. He remembers the cold metal of the bridge railing under his hands. He remembers the warm sandwich in the paper bag, eaten alone at his kitchen table at 4 a.m. He remembers thinking, for the first time in years, that maybe the world wasn't finished with him yet. He decides he needs to know more about her life, gently, respectfully, without frightening her or exposing what he remembers. He asks Priya to quietly look into Grace Whitfield's employment history and current circumstances, framing it as routine vendor background research. What Priya uncovers over the following days paints a picture that makes Nathaniel's jaw tighten with a mixture of sympathy and quiet fury. Grace Whitfield, now 39 years old, has spent the last 15 years working an almost unbroken chain of exhausting service jobs, diners, catering companies, hotel banquets, anything that paid enough to keep a roof over her head. Her younger brother, whom she raised almost single-handedly after their parents died, grew into a good man, but struggled for years with a chronic illness that drained every spare dollar Grace ever earned on medical bills. She never married. Records show one broken engagement in her late 20s to a man named Marcus Riley, who left her the moment her brother's medical expenses became a financial burden he wasn't willing to share. Nathaniel reads this last detail twice, his hands tightening around the paper. Someone left her the same way Rachel left him, for the same shallow, cowardly reason. The two ghosts of his past, Rachel's laughter and Grace's kindness, suddenly feel connected by something deeper than coincidence, some cruel symmetry in how the world treats people who give everything and people who take everything. Over the next several weeks, Nathaniel begins finding small, careful ways to be near her without revealing who he is or what he remembers. He starts taking his morning coffee from the lobby cart instead of having it delivered to his office. He learns, slowly, in small fragments of conversation, who Grace Whitfield has become. She is kind to everyone, even people who are rude to her. She remembers small details about people's lives, whether they take sugar, whether their child is sick, whether they had a hard week, and she asks about those details every single time, genuinely caring about the answers. She laughs easily despite everything she has been through, a real laugh, not the tired performance kind. And she has absolutely no idea that the quiet, intense billionaire who now stops by her cart every morning is the same broken young man she once talked down from the edge of a bridge 15 years ago. One morning, several weeks into this careful ritual, Nathaniel finally works up the courage to ask her a question that has been sitting in his throat like a stone. "Have you always worked in food service?" he asks, trying to sound casual, failing completely. Grace smiles, pouring his coffee with practiced ease. "Started when I was 19. Worked at a little diner back home for years before it closed down. Feels like a different life now." "Did you like it?" "The diner?" he asks. "I loved it, actually," she says, and something soft crosses her face. "We had regulars who felt like family. And every once in a while, something would happen that reminded you why the job mattered, even on the worst days." Nathaniel's heart pounds, so hard he's certain she must hear it. "Like what?" Grace pauses, and for a moment, a flicker of something distant crosses her expression, like she's reaching for a memory she hasn't touched in years. "There was this one night," she says slowly. "Years ago, I saw a young man standing on a bridge near the diner, late at night, and something about the way he stood there scared me. I stopped and talked to him for a while. I never even found out if he was okay afterward. I think about him sometimes. Hope he found his way through whatever he was going through." Exhausted, frightened, and completely out of options, Grace sits alone in her small apartment with Victor's card in her trembling hands, torn between her conscience and her brother's life. But when she arrives at his office early that morning, before regular hours, she overhears Nathaniel on a phone call with Priya, discussing the background investigation into Grace Whitfield's life, her brother's illness, her broken engagement, details of her private pain laid out like a business report. Grace, standing frozen in the doorway, misunderstands everything. She believes Nathaniel has been quietly investigating her, exploiting her private struggles, perhaps even suspecting her of being a corporate spy planted by his rivals. The warmth she felt building toward this strange, intense man over the past few weeks curdles instantly into betrayal. She turns and walks away before he even notices she was there, her heart shattering in a way she doesn't fully understand, mourning a connection she didn't even know she had started to hope for. The next morning, Nathaniel arrives at the lobby cart eager to finally tell her the truth about the bridge, about who he used to be, about the 15 years he spent hoping to find her again. But Grace is cold, distant, professional in a way that feels like a wall slamming shut. When he tries to ask if something is wrong, she simply says she has a lot of cards to serve today and walks away without meeting his eyes. Confused and wounded, Nathaniel spends the next several days trying to understand what changed, while Grace spends those same days wrestling with an impossible decision. Victor Hale, growing impatient, increases his offer and adds new pressure, hinting that he already knows Grace overheard something troubling about Nathaniel investigating her, and suggesting that a man capable of that kind of quiet surveillance is not a man deserving her loyalty. Then comes the emotional payoff the audience has been waiting for. Late one evening, working alone after her shift ended, Grace is gathering her things in the small catering supply closet when Nathaniel finds her, unable to bear the distance between them any longer. He finally tells her everything. He tells her about the bridge. He tells her about the notebook Rachel rejected. He tells her about the sandwich and the pie, still remembered after 15 years, about the words she said to him, that the world isn't done with you yet, and how those words became the foundation of everything he built afterward. He tells her he had investigators searching for her for years, not to exploit her, but to thank her, to somehow repay a debt he never stopped owing. Grace stands there in stunned silence, tears rising in her eyes as 15 years of memory suddenly rearrange themselves into an entirely new shape. The stranger from the bridge, the billionaire from the lobby, the same person. But before she can respond, before this fragile, beautiful moment can settle into something real, she remembers the recorded phone call she overheard, and old wounds flare up faster than new understanding can heal them. Then why, she asks, voice shaking, were you investigating my brother's illness? My broken engagement? Things I never told you. Nathaniel's face falls as he realizes what she must have overheard, and how badly it must have looked from the outside. He explains, desperately, that he only wanted to understand her life, so he could find a respectful way to reconnect, to make sure reaching out to her wouldn't cause harm or embarrassment, never imagining she would discover it framed so coldly out of context. Grace wants to believe him. Every instinct in her aching heart wants to believe him. But years of disappointment have taught her caution, and she tells him she needs time, real time, to process 15 years of memory rewriting itself in a single conversation. She leaves the closet, leaves the building, and does not answer his calls for the next 3 days. During those 3 days, Victor Hale makes his final move. Knowing Grace is emotionally vulnerable and financially desperate, he arranges a meeting and offers her an even larger sum, enough to pay off her brother's medical debt entirely and secure his future treatment for years, in exchange for something devastatingly simple: her signature on a document falsely claiming that Nathaniel Hale pressured her, a low-wage employee, into an inappropriate personal relationship. Information Victor plans to leak to the press to destroy Nathaniel's reputation and tank his company's stock price during the takeover battle. Grace holds the pen in her trembling hand, staring at the paper that could save her brother's life. And here is the cliffhanger. Just as she begins to sign her name, the door bursts open and Nathaniel walks in, having tracked Victor's meeting location through his own investigators, his face pale with a fear far greater than any hostile takeover has ever caused him. Their eyes meet across the room. Grace's pen hovers, ink barely touching paper. And the screen cuts to black on the sound of Nathaniel's voice, breaking, saying her name for the very first time since he learned it 15 years too late. If your heart is racing right now, that's exactly how this story is meant to make you feel. So make sure you're subscribed because the next part of this story gets even more emotional, and I promise you the ending will stay with you long after the video ends. Now let's continue. Nathaniel doesn't move from the doorway at first. He simply says her name, softly, the way you'd speak to someone standing on a ledge, because in many ways, that's exactly where Grace is standing right now, on the ledge between protecting her brother and protecting her own integrity. Victor, sensing his advantage slipping, quickly reminds Grace that the money is only available if she signs today, right now, in front of witnesses before Nathaniel can interfere. Grace looks down at the paper. She looks at Victor's cold, calculating smile. She looks at Nathaniel standing in the doorway, his chest rising and falling too fast, his eyes pleading with her not because he's afraid of a scandal, but because he's afraid of losing her a second time in one lifetime. She sets the pen down. "I can't," she says quietly, her voice trembling but certain. "I don't care how much money you're offering. I won't lie about a good man to save my brother, because that's not the kind of person my parents raised me to be, and it's not the kind of person I want my brother to owe his life to." Victor's expression twists with fury, and he tries one final threat, reminding her that without his money, her brother's treatment remains out of reach. It is Nathaniel who steps forward now, calm despite the storm inside him, and tells Victor that Grace's brother's medical bills will be paid in full by tomorrow morning. Not as a bribe, not as a transaction, but as a debt of gratitude 15 years overdue, with absolutely no conditions attached. He tells Victor that his takeover attempt has already failed because the board discovered his manipulation tactics that very morning through an anonymous tip. A tip it becomes clear moments later actually came from Priya, who had grown suspicious of Victor's activities and quietly gathered evidence over the past several days. Victor, defeated and exposed, storms out of the room, his hostile takeover collapsing along with his reputation in the business world over the following weeks. Grace stands there, overwhelmed, tears finally falling freely, 15 years of exhaustion and heartbreak and quiet survival breaking open all at once. Nathaniel crosses the room slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back if she needs to, and simply stands in front of her, close but respectful, and tells her the rest of what he came to say. He tells her that he's not asking her to be grateful. He's not asking her to owe him anything for paying her brother's medical bills, because that debt was never hers to owe. It was his from the moment she stopped on that bridge 15 years ago and chose to care about a stranger's pain when she had every reason in the world to simply walk past. He tells her that finding her again wasn't about closure or curiosity. It was about a promise he made to himself that night, that if he ever found the person who saved him, he would spend the rest of his life making sure she knew her kindness mattered. Grace listens to every word, and slowly, carefully, the wall she built over years of disappointment begins to lower, not because a billionaire is offering her comfort, but because the man standing in front of her is the same person from that cold night on the bridge, still recognizable underneath 15 years of success and armor, still capable of being that vulnerable, that honest, that human. In the weeks that follow, their relationship grows slowly, deliberately, nothing rushed, nothing assumed. Nathaniel insists Grace no longer needs to work exhausting double shifts to survive, but he doesn't simply hand her money either. Instead, he offers her a position within the company's employee wellness program, work that uses her natural gift for caring about people in a way that finally matches her compensation to her worth. Grace, proud and independent, initially resists accepting anything that feels like charity, until Nathaniel reminds her, gently, that accepting help from someone who genuinely cares about you is not weakness. It's simply allowing love to move in more than one direction, something she has given freely to others her entire life without ever. Nathaniel and Grace's relationship deepens through quiet dinners, long walks, late-night conversations where two people who spent 15 years surviving separately finally allow themselves to be truly known by another person. Rachel, Nathaniel's former fiancée, resurfaces briefly during this time, having heard of his billionaire status and his growing public relationship with Grace, attempting to reconnect and rekindle what she abandoned years earlier. Nathaniel meets with her exactly once, calmly, without anger, and tells her that he forgives her for leaving, because her leaving led him to the bridge, and the bridge led him to Grace, and he wouldn't trade that path for any version of a life that kept Rachel in it. Rachel leaves the meeting in stunned silence, finally understanding that some doors, once closed, reveal far better rooms behind different ones. The story reaches its emotional climax nearly 1 year after that first collision of coffee cups in the lobby. Nathaniel takes Grace back to the small town where they first met, to the exact bridge where she once talked a broken young man away from the edge of his darkest night. Standing in that same spot, older now, both of them shaped by 15 years of struggle and survival, Nathaniel gets down on one knee, holding a ring far simpler than anything his wealth could. The next several years were not a fairy tale. They were slow, grinding, and often humiliating in ways that never make it into magazine profiles written after the fact. Nathaniel took his logistics idea, the plan to help small local shops move goods faster and cheaper than the big national chains, and he began pitching it to anyone who would listen. He borrowed a suit from a coworker at the hardware store, a suit 2 sizes too big in the shoulders, and he practiced his pitch in front of a cracked bathroom mirror until the words stopped shaking in his mouth. He pitched to 17 different investors over the course of 2 years. 16 of them said no. Some didn't even bother finishing the meeting, glancing at their watches after 5 minutes and citing other appointments that clearly didn't exist. One investor laughed out loud, actually laughed, and told Nathaniel that a concrete bag lifter with a notebook full of scribbles had no business dreaming this big, that dreams like his were for men with degrees and connections and last names people recognized. Nathaniel walked out of that meeting, sat in his car in the parking lot, and allowed himself exactly 10 minutes to feel the sting of it before he wiped his face, started the engine, and drove to the next appointment on his list. He kept a small, worn index card in his wallet during those years, and on it, in his own handwriting, were the words she had said to him on the bridge. "You look like someone the world isn't done with yet." He would pull that card out before every single pitch meeting, read it once, silently, and put it back in his pocket like a kind of armor. The 17th investor was different. His name was Walter Briggs, an older man in his early 70s who had built and lost 2 fortunes before Nathaniel ever walked through his office door, and who had a reputation for being blunt to the point of cruelty with young entrepreneurs who wasted his time. Walter's assistant nearly turned Nathaniel away at the front desk, noting that Mr. Briggs did not take unscheduled meetings with strangers who showed up in ill-fitting suits asking for 10 minutes of his time. But something made Walter, passing through the lobby on his way to lunch, pause and actually look at the young man waiting there, notebook clutched against his chest like it contained something more valuable than gold. Walter gave him 15 minutes in a hallway, standing up, no chairs, no coffee, no pleasantries. Nathaniel talked fast, nervous, occasionally stumbling over his own words, laying out his plan for regional logistics networks that could undercut the shipping monopolies, squeezing small shop owners out of business. Walter listened without interrupting, his face giving away nothing, and when Nathaniel finished, there was a long, terrible silence. Then Walter said something Nathaniel would never forget. He said, "Everyone in this city has heard variations of this pitch 100 times. Most of them are wrong about the market. You are wrong about the market, too, in about 6 specific places I could point to right now." Nathaniel's stomach dropped, certain this was another rejection dressed up in politeness. But Walter continued, "The difference is, you're the first person who's pitched me this in 4 years who looked like they'd actually die before they gave up on it. That matters more than being right about the market. I could teach a man about markets. I can't teach him that look in his eyes." Walter gave him a loan, small by Walter's standards, but enormous to Nathaniel, along with a warning that would echo in Nathaniel's mind for the next decade. "Fail once," Walter told him, "and you're done. Not because I'll take my money back angrily, because men like you don't survive failing twice. You'll fold in on yourself and become exactly what that fiancé of yours already decided you were." Nathaniel never told Walter about Rachel specifically. He never had to. Walter simply understood, in the way older men sometimes understand younger men without needing every detail explained. Nathaniel did not fail once. He worked 18-hour days that blurred into each other without clear boundaries between one week and the next. He slept in his tiny rented office more nights than in his actual apartment, waking up with cardboard box shapes pressed into his cheek from using packing materials as makeshift pillows. He built the small logistics company one contract at a time, one relationship at a time, earning trust from local shop owners who had been burned before by promises from men who looked exactly like him 5 years earlier and disappeared with their deposits. The turning point came in year 4, when a regional grocery chain, desperate after their existing shipping contractor collapsed during a labor dispute, gave Nathaniel's company a trial contract nobody else wanted to touch on such short notice. Nathaniel and his skeleton crew of 6 employees worked around the clock for 11 days straight to prove they could handle the volume, sleeping in shifts on cots inside the warehouse, surviving on gas station coffee, and the kind of adrenaline that comes from knowing this single contract could make or break everything. They delivered every single shipment on time. Not most. Every one. From there, the company grew the way avalanches grow, slowly at first, then all at once. Regional shipping became national distribution. National distribution became a technology platform that other logistics companies eventually licensed from him rather than compete against. By the time Nathaniel turned 35, Hale Logistics International employed over 4,000 people. By 40, that number had nearly tripled, and Nathaniel Hale's name appeared on the cover of business magazines with words like visionary and unstoppable printed beside a photograph of a man who no longer resembled the boy who once lifted concrete bags for $9 an hour. Walter Briggs lived long enough to see it all happen, retiring wealthy in content, occasionally showing up unannounced at Nathaniel's office just to remind him, with a dry laugh, that he'd told him so. But wealth did not heal him. Not fully, and not in the ways people assumed it would. Because underneath the tailored suits and the private jets and the glass-walled corner offices, Nathaniel still carried 2 ghosts that money could never fully exorcise. The ghost of Rachel's tired laughter across a white tablecloth, and the ghost of a stranger's kindness on a bridge, a woman whose name he never learned that night, whose face had softened and blurred slightly with time in his memory, but whose voice he could still hear with perfect clarity whenever the office grew quiet enough for old memories to surface. He dated occasionally over the years, brief relationships that never survived contact with how guarded he'd become. Women found him generous, brilliant, endlessly successful, and completely unreachable in the one place that mattered most. He hired investigators twice, at great expense, to try to track down the woman from the bridge, giving them the only details he had, a diner near a specific bridge in a town he'd since left behind, a young waitress with kind eyes sometime around 15 years ago. Both times, the trail went cold within weeks. The diner had closed years earlier during an economic downturn. Employee records have been lost or never properly digitized. People move, names change, memories fade for everyone except, it seemed, for him. Eventually, he stopped actively searching, though he never once stopped remembering, and some part of him, quiet and persistent, never fully believed the search was truly over. Now, present day, Nathaniel Hale is 41 years old, standing in the glass-walled headquarters of Hale Logistics International, a company employing over 11,000 people across 3 countries. He is unmarried, guarded, known throughout the business world as brilliant but emotionally unreachable, the kind of man profiled extensively in trade publications who somehow always manages to reveal nothing personal in a 2-hour interview. His employees respect him deeply. Some fear him, mostly the ones who've never actually spoken to him directly. Almost none of them truly know him, because Nathaniel long ago decided, somewhere in the wreckage of that restaurant table 15 years earlier, that letting people close was simply the fastest, most efficient way to get hurt. It is a Tuesday morning, unremarkable by every measure except the one that matters. Nathaniel walks into the executive floor for an emergency meeting regarding a hostile takeover attempt from a rival businessman named Victor Hale, no relation, Simply a cruel coincidence of shared surnames that Nathaniel finds darkly amusing on his better days and deeply irritating on his worst ones. As he crosses the marble lobby toward the elevator bank, distracted, reading an urgent email on his phone, a catering cart nearly collides with him at the corner, and a woman quickly steadies the tray of coffee cups before they can crash to the floor. "I'm so sorry, sir," she says, breathless, gathering the cups back into place with practiced, careful hands. Nathaniel looks up to apologize for not watching where he was walking, the words already forming in his mouth out of habit, and they die there instantly, unspoken. It's her. Older, yes. 15 years older. Lines around her eyes that weren't there before, the kind that come from worry rather than age alone. Hair pulled back in a neat bun instead of falling loose with exhaustion the way it had that night on the bridge. But it is unmistakably her. The same eyes that once looked at a broken stranger with more compassion than most people show their own family. The same voice, only steadier now, carrying a different kind of tiredness, the tiredness of someone who has been quietly surviving, one shift at a time, for a very long time. Her name tag reads Grace. Nathaniel Hale, the man who negotiated billion-dollar mergers without blinking. The man whose face never gave away a single emotion during the most hostile business meetings of his career. The man reporters had once described as having a poker face that could bankrupt a casino, feels his entire chest cave in with the force of 15 years catching up to him all at once, right there in his own lobby at 9 in the morning, over a nearly spilled tray of coffee. He doesn't say anything. He can't. His mouth opens slightly, no sound coming out, and Grace, mistaking his silence for irritation about the near accident, quickly apologizes again, straightens the cart, and hurries away down the hallway toward the executive break room, completely unaware that she just walked past the single most important person in her past without recognizing him at all. Because to Grace, this was just an ordinary Tuesday, one of hundreds she'd worked at hundreds of office buildings over the years for the catering company that contracted her out wherever extra coffee service was needed. She didn't remember a stranger on a bridge 15 years ago the way he remembered her. Not because the moment hadn't mattered to her, but because she had lived through so many other hard nights since then that one particular bridge, one particular stranger, had folded quietly into the general fog of a decade and a half spent simply trying to keep her head above water. Nathaniel stands frozen in the lobby for almost a full minute, oblivious to the executives walking past him, murmuring good mornings he doesn't hear, until his assistant, a sharp, no-nonsense young woman named Priya, gently touches his arm. "Mr. Hale, the board is waiting." He nods, forces his legs to move, and walks into the meeting room like a man sleepwalking through his own life, sitting through 45 minutes of hostile takeover strategy without retaining a single sentence of it, nodding at moments where nodding seemed appropriate, while his mind replayed a 15-year-old memory on a loop. For the rest of that day, Nathaniel cannot focus on anything. In the middle of a presentation about supply chain restructuring, a presentation his own team spent 3 weeks preparing, his mind keeps drifting back to the lobby, to her face, to the almost impossible coincidence of finding her here, inside his own company, after 15 years of searching and failing to find her anywhere else on Earth. Twice during the meeting, colleagues have to repeat questions to him. His chief financial officer, a woman who has worked alongside him for 9 years and has never once seen him distracted in a meeting, actually asks afterward if he's feeling unwell. He calls Priya into his office at the end of the day and asks, as casually as he can manage, phrasing it like idle curiosity rather than the most important question he's asked in 15 years, about the catering staff that services the building. Priya explains that the coffee service is run through a third-party vendor contracted by the building's property management company, not directly employed by Hale Logistics itself, which is why Nathaniel has never had reason to know any of their names before today. Her name, Priya says, checking the vendor roster on her tablet, according to this, is Grace Whitfield. Grace Whitfield. He repeats the name quietly to himself after Priya leaves his office, testing the shape of it in his mouth, and something in his chest aches with a strange, complicated relief unlike anything he's felt in years. Finally, after 15 years of hiring investigators, chasing cold leads, and slowly convincing himself the search was over. He has a name to go with the face he never once managed to forget. That night, Nathaniel does something he rarely allows himself to do anymore. He goes home to his enormous, mostly empty penthouse, a space decorated by an interior designer he hired but never fully connected with, and he pours a glass of scotch he doesn't actually drink, just holds, and sits by the window overlooking the city, remembering. He remembers the cold metal of the bridge railing under his hands. He remembers the warm sandwich in the paper bag, eaten alone at his kitchen table at 4 in the morning while the rest of the world slept. He remembers thinking, for the first time in years at that point, that maybe the world wasn't finished with him yet. He sits there until nearly 2 in the morning, the scotch untouched, the city lights blurring slightly as his eyes grow tired, turning 15 years of memory over and over like a stone worn smooth from handling. He decides he needs to know more about her life, gently, respectfully, without frightening her or exposing what he remembers too soon, before she's ready to hear it. He tells himself this is simply due diligence, the kind of careful, thorough approach that built his entire company. But underneath that rationalization is something far more vulnerable. He is terrified of approaching her the wrong way and losing this chance the way he lost so many other things in his life, through carelessness or bad timing. He asks Priya to quietly look into Grace Whitfield's employment history and current circumstances, framing it, somewhat clumsily, as routine vendor background research, standard practice for any long-term contractor relationship. Priya, sharp enough to sense there's more to this request than her boss is admitting, doesn't push, but makes a private note to keep a closer eye on the situation going forward, a decision that will matter enormously later in this story. What Priya uncovers over the following days paints a picture that makes Nathaniel's jaw tighten with a mixture of sympathy and quiet fury, emotions he rarely allows himself to feel this openly about anyone. Grace Whitfield, now 39 years old, has spent the last 15 years working an almost unbroken chain of exhausting service jobs. After the diner closed during an economic downer 11 years ago, she moved through hotel banquet halls, event catering companies, and eventually the vendor company servicing office buildings like Hale Logistics International, always taking whatever shifts paid the most, regardless of how brutal the hours. Her younger brother, whom she raised almost single-handedly after their parents passed when she was barely out of her teens herself, grew into a good, kind man, but was diagnosed in his mid-20s with a chronic autoimmune condition that has drained nearly every spare dollar Grace has ever earned on medical bills, specialist visits, and treatments only partially covered by whatever insurance her various service jobs provided. She never married. Records show one serious engagement in her late 20s to a man named Marcus Riley, who stayed with her for nearly 3 years before quietly ending things the same month her brother's medical expenses spiked to a level Marcus apparently decided he wasn't willing to share his life around. He left a note. Grace found out later, through mutual friends, that he was engaged to someone else within 8 months. Nathaniel reads this last detail twice, his hands tightening around the paper Priya printed for him. An old habit from before everything went digital. Something about physical paper making bad news feel more real and more necessary to sit with rather than skim past on a screen. Someone left her the same way Rachel left him, for the same shallow, cowardly reason, dressed up in different language. The two ghosts of his past, Rachel's laughter across that white tablecloth and Grace's kindness on a freezing bridge, suddenly feel connected by something deeper than coincidence, some cruel, repeating symmetry in how the world so often treats the people who give everything they have against the people who simply take it and leave when giving becomes inconvenient. Over the next several weeks, Nathaniel begins finding small, careful ways to be near her without revealing who he is or what he remembers, without frightening away something so fragile before it has any chance to grow. He starts taking his morning coffee from the lobby cart instead of having it delivered directly to his office the way he has for the last 6 years. A small change that his assistant notices immediately but says nothing about, filing it away as one more piece of unusual behavior from a man who has been acting unusual since that Tuesday morning collision. He learns, slowly, in small fragments of conversation stretched across many mornings, who Grace Whitfield has become in the 15 years since he last saw her. She is kind to everyone who passes her cart, even the executives who are curt with her, who barely look up from their phones long enough to say thank you. She remembers small details about people's lives with an ease that seems almost effortless, whether they take sugar or sweetener, whether their child has a big test that week, whether they mentioned a rough weekend the last time they spoke, and she asks about those details every single time, genuinely caring about the answers rather than performing polite small talk the way most service industry conversations tend to go. She laughs easily despite everything Nathaniel now knows she has been through, a real laugh, warm and unguarded, not the tired, hollow performance kind he sees so often in the boardrooms upstairs. And she has absolutely no idea that the quiet, intense billionaire who now stops by her cart every single morning, rain or shine, is the same broken young man she once talked down from the edge of a bridge 15 years ago in a town 300 miles from here. One morning, several weeks into this careful, unspoken ritual, Nathaniel finally works up the courage to ask her a question that has been sitting in his throat like a stone for days. "Have you always worked in food service?" he asks, trying to sound casual, failing almost completely, his voice slightly too careful, too measured for a simple lobby conversation. Grace smiles, pouring his coffee with the practiced ease of someone who has poured 10,000 cups exactly like it. "Started when I was 19. Worked at a little diner back home for years before it closed down. Feels like a different life now, honestly. Did you like it?" "The diner?" he asks, and something in the question comes out heavier than he means it to. "I loved it, actually," she says, and something soft crosses her face, a flicker of genuine nostalgia. "We had regulars who felt like family. Old Mr. Alvarez, who came in every single morning at 6:15 for the same order, black coffee and wheat toast, for 11 straight years. And every once in a while, something would happen that reminded you why the job mattered. Even on the worst days, even when your feet were killing you and some customer just yelled at you over cold fries." Nathaniel's heart pounds so hard he's certain she must be able to hear it from across the cart. "Like what?" Grace pauses, wiping her hands on a cloth, and for a moment a flicker of something distant crosses her expression, like she's reaching for a memory she hasn't touched in a very long time, one buried under 15 years of other harder memories piled on top of it. "There was this one night," she says slowly, almost to herself. "Years ago, back when I was still pretty young myself. I saw a young man standing on a bridge near the diner, real late at night, and something about the way he stood there scared me half to death. I stopped and talked to him for a while. I don't even really remember what I said, just talked until he didn't seem so far away anymore. I never even found out if he was okay afterward. I think about him sometimes, actually. Hope he found his way through whatever he was going through that night." Nathaniel stands completely still, coffee cup halfway to his lips, his entire body flooded with 15 years of unspoken gratitude, threatening to spill out right there in the lobby. "I'm sure," he says quietly, his voice rougher than he intends, forcing itself past something tight in his throat, "that whatever you said to him that night, it mattered more than you'll ever know." Grace looks at him a moment longer than necessary, something unreadable passing behind her eyes, a flicker of familiarity she can't quite place, like a word sitting on the tip of her tongue that refuses to surface. And then the moment breaks as another employee approaches the cart needing coffee for a 9 o'clock meeting, and she moves on to serve them with the same steady warmth she gives everyone, the moment folding itself quietly away. That night, Nathaniel makes a decision. He cannot keep circling this truth from a careful distance forever, watching her from across a coffee cart like a coward with $1 billion and none of the courage to match it. He decides he will tell her who he is, properly, respectfully, at the right moment, soon, before the ache of almost telling her every single morning becomes unbearable. But before he gets the chance, something happens that neither of them saw coming, something that will nearly destroy the fragile thing quietly growing between them before it ever has the chance to become real. Victor Hale, the rival businessman attempting the hostile takeover of Nathaniel's company, a man who built his fortune not through building anything of value, but through carefully manufactured leverage over other people's weaknesses, discovers through a mole inside the building A junior analyst desperate for a bigger paycheck than Hale Logistics is willing to offer him. That Nathaniel has developed an unusual, almost obsessive interest in a member of the catering staff. Victor, sensing an opportunity the way sharks sense blood in water, has Grace secretly investigated by his own people, and he learns, within days, about her brother's massive medical debt, still unpaid after all these years despite Grace's endless, grinding work across a decade and a half of double shifts. Victor approaches Grace privately, off company grounds, catching her outside her apartment building on an evening when she's exhausted and vulnerable after a 14-hour shift, offering to quietly pay off her brother's entire medical debt, tens of thousands of dollars that have hung over her family like a permanent storm cloud for years, in exchange for one simple favor. She must plant a small recording device, disguised cleverly as a coffee thermos, near Nathaniel's private office, allowing Victor to gather intelligence on Nathaniel's takeover defense strategy before the board's critical vote. Grace is horrified by the offer at first, refusing outright, telling Victor plainly that she wants nothing to do with corporate espionage regardless of the money involved. But that night, alone in her small apartment, she receives a call from the hospital about her brother's declining condition and a new, urgent, expensive treatment option his doctor believes could finally stabilize him long-term, one their insurance refuses to fully cover, leaving a gap of nearly $40,000 that Grace has absolutely no way to close on her current wages no matter how many extra shifts she picks up. Exhausted, frightened, and completely out of options, Grace sits alone at her small kitchen table that night with Victor's business card in her trembling hands. The same kind of card, expensive cardstock and embossed lettering, that represents everything she has spent her entire life without, torn between her conscience and her brother's life in a way that feels almost unbearably cruel to have to choose between it all. Here is where the story takes its first devastating twist. Grace does not agree to spy for Victor. She sits with the decision for 2 sleepless nights, praying over it, calling her brother just to hear his voice, and ultimately decides to do something far braver than either taking the money or simply refusing and walking away. She decides to go directly to Nathaniel's office the next morning, before regular business hours when the floor is still mostly empty, not to plant a device, but to confess everything, to warn him that someone is trying to use her against him, hoping that telling the truth outright will somehow protect them both from whatever Victor is planning next. But when she arrives at his office early that morning, quiet and nervous, rehearsing what she'll say under her breath in the elevator, she overhears Nathaniel through his partially open office door, on a phone call with Priya, discussing the background investigation into Grace Whitfield's life in clinical detail, her brother's illness, her broken engagement to Marcus Riley, details of her most private pain laid out like a business report between 2 executives. Grace, standing frozen in the doorway, her hand still raised to knock, misunderstands everything in an instant. She believes Nathaniel has been quietly investigating her all along, exploiting her private struggles for some purpose she can't fully name, perhaps even suspecting her, exactly as Victor warned her he might, of being a potential problem, a person whose desperation makes her dangerous rather than someone deserving of basic human dignity. The warmth she felt slowly building toward this strange, intense man over the past several weeks, the man who remembered how she took her coffee, who asked real questions and seemed to actually listen to the answers, curdles instantly into something that feels dangerously close to betrayal. She turns and walks away before he even notices she was standing there, her heart shattering in a way she doesn't fully understand herself, mourning a connection she didn't even realize until this exact moment that she had quietly started to hope for.